it's not a crazy opinion to me to think that, you know, trans athletes should not be going up against female athletes.
He's done the fucking meme of thinking that Mac Beggs is a trans woman when he's a trans man. And this is what happens when people are lied to by the media and we don't properly scrutinise the stories that they're telling here. So this one's going to be a response to someone who I've actually had on the channel. He's called Van Man Talks. We get on really well. He's like a liberal type. He does lots of kind of pro-EU content. We actually agreed a lot in the discussion that we had about the direction of the Labour Party, for example, and all-round nice guy. Now, he put out a video a few days ago called "It's Okay to be left-wing and to want common sense gender politics," for example. Now, he's done two things here. First of all, he's used the phrase common sense, which is a phrase that makes it really just sets kind of the gnarled, angry part of my brain on fire, because it is, in essence, people admitting they have no argument, for example, right? If you say something is common sense, it means you have no moral or ethical justification for it, but you do it. It's something that you believe to be true, basically as an aphorism, right? You can't properly justify it through any kind of moral justification, so you just say, oh, it's just common sense, isn't it, right? It's a way of dismissing real criticism because you actually have no theoretical grounding for the point that you're making. The second one, right? Common sense is personal bias, true. The other thing that he's done here is that in the thumbnail to the video, right? He's put, I don't know if anybody's seen this, but in America, there was a trans boy who, under their right-wing GOP-led rules, for example, regarding sports competitions, even though he's on T, was forced to compete with cisgender women in fighting tournaments. So there was this very famous picture of this trans boy with a cis girl in a headlock because of the ridiculous ways in which transphobes want gender politics to be properly done in those kind of red states, for example, where they genuinely are saying, we want trans men to be in bathrooms with cisgender women, full beard, cowboy hat, whatever it might be, right? Because they have very silly and views with no justification for any of this other than, you know, trans people bad, let's hurt trans people as much as possible. Because a lot of the time, people are like transphobes, they just forget that trans men exist, right? Like, spoiler alert, trans men do exist. They're a big part of this discussion. And the ridiculous nature of the right-wing views on how transgender people should operate within society forces them into a position of making transgender men who are pumped full of testosterone fighting in these kind of sports events with cisgender women, and that could lead to a lot of danger, for example. So I don't have high hopes of this video, but again, I like Fan Man Talks. We had really great positive discussions. He may prove me wrong. There's not watched already. This is a first-time reaction, so if I am wrong in my assumptions here, Van Man, I apologise. But let's have a watch, let's critique, and let's see what he says.
You can be left-wing and not want males in female prisons. You can be left-wing and not want trans athletes completely destroying female athletes. You know, this shouldn't be a controversial, wacky opinion.
It was Mac Beggs, that's the name of the guy. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sandra Clowncar. Thanks for it. Let me bring up the article in question. See, this is the picture that everyone recognises. This is the picture that he has on the thumbnail for his video. This is literally a trans boy, so someone who's assigned female at birth, being forced to compete with cis women because the GOP forgot that trans men exist, essentially. Yes, you can, 2 for 5, cheers. If I go to his channel, you'll see that this photo here is on the thumbnail for the video, right? Here's the thumbnail for the video, and you can see that picture of Mac Beggs there, right?
Greetings and welcome, and for today's video I want to talk, yesterday a lot of people were getting very upset with this announcement from Labour that they will be backing in a review of the Equalities Act. So basically the Equality Act holds a lot of trans rights and things like this, and yeah, a lot of people are getting upset with this, and this video may be controversial. Whenever I seem to touch on this subject of trans rights and gender politics, I seem to get a lot of people angry and I lose subscribers. But you know what, I pride myself on the fact that in all my videos, I've always just been open and honest on my opinions. I've never tried to pander to any type of group, or I've never not talked about subjects because I think it might upset people and they will disagree with me and I'll lose subscribers. You know, that's not what my video's about. What's the point of doing this if you can't be open and honest about your...
I mean, I think you've missed out on what the entirety of the right-wing media sphere will do when they will literally just say anything, whatever gets them money or clicks. Because again, as far as the right-wing media concerned, it is a money game, for example. I mean, I could keep way more members of my people watching my channel. I lose subscribers all the time when I criticise the Labour Party, when I don't say that I explicitly love everything the European Union does, even though I supported remaining in the European Union. If I criticise the European Union even at all, people start unsubscribing to my channel. What's something that lost me loads of subscribers recently? I forget what it was. There was definitely a segment I'd done where I lost loads of subs, but whatever. I don't care because, again, I'm here to espouse my political ideology in the same way that Fan Man is, so I agree with that.
Your opinions. The way I do my videos kind of dictates that anyway. You know, I don't work from a script. I'm just sitting in my van talking to you lovely people and just giving my opinions on things. But yeah, this is always a controversial subject and it really shouldn't be. But yeah, this is what I think. I think if Labour are doing what I think they're doing, then I shouldn't have moved into that lane. I've got a UPS truck there. If Labour are doing what I think they're doing, then I think this is a good move. Now, obviously, everyone on the left wants rights for trans people. We want them to feel accepted, we want them to feel comfortable in life and have equal opportunities to everyone else. Of course, we want that. But if Labour are doing what I think they're doing, which is basically, we want all those good things, but let's not throw common sense out of the window. And when I say common sense out the window, I've just pulled into this lane again. When I say common sense out the window, I'm talking about recent events in Scotland where a man was put into a female prison. A male...
Okay, this is the problem with the media sphere in this country, right? I said the same thing responding to Darren Grimes, who said exactly the same thing that Van Man is saying here, where they say cisgender man was put into a women's prison. Or trans woman was put into a women's prison, right? This is a man in a women's prison, right? Right, so it's long story here. The current process with treating with trans women in women's prisons, for example, of which there are currently 6, right? There are currently 6 trans women in women's prisons in the whole of the United Kingdom. The current process that we have, which is what was followed in this case, is that if a trans woman is going to put into prison, on a case-by-case basis, they are judged by whether or not they are theoretically going to be a threat to the people in that prison, and then they'll put in the corresponding prison that this independent board thinks that they should be put into, right? There's literally a trans prisoner advisory board who decides and make on a case-by-case basis which one they are safe for going into. If they are somebody who is not going to be safe to be around female prisoners, for example, they do not get put in the women's prison, which is exactly what happened to Isla Bryson, right? She was, whilst being held in solitary confinement in a women's prison, for example, so not in general population, not in a women's prison around other inmates, literally in solitary confinement, specifically so that she couldn't interact with prisoners whilst they made her decision on whether or not which prison she should be in, for example. And then the board, under the current process, then decided that she was, correctly in my opinion, a threat to women in the prison, and so was moved to a men's prison, right? That is the current process. They followed it through, and it came to the result that everybody wanted. Because of the way in this process works and the discussion was being had whilst her decision on her was being made, the press jumped on this to say she's in a women's prison without mentioning she's in solitary confinement. Oh, they've backed down by moving to a men's prison, when actually they didn't back down on anything. They followed the current procedure. And I don't blame Van Man for not understanding this, because the media have literally lied from the beginning on every single part of this case and of the gender reform bill. People kept saying, "Oh, this is a problem. Oh, the gender reform bill has moved Isla Bryson into a women's prison when she shouldn't be there." When the gender reform bill was literally struck down by the Section 35 order, so it literally couldn't have had any effect on this specific case. But because they're tangentially related, happening at similar times, and there was a massive fuss about both of them, the media kind of connected them together without properly expanding upon anything that was happening here. So I don't blame him not understanding this issue in totality, right? I really don't blame him. But, you are making political content on YouTube. You really should be researching these things in a much more in holistic fashion. You really should be.
Rapist at that point. I mean, even just putting a man in a female prison in the first place is crazy, let alone a male rapist who decided to transition during their sentencing. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm hoping Labour are doing. They want all the good things for trans rights, but let's not throw common sense out the window. I mean, how does something like that happen?
Again, explain what you mean by common sense here, right? Because you don't mean anything. You just have reacted in whatever way that you would do to a particular issue essentially based upon your own feelings, rather than any kind of structural analysis of the situation, and then said, well, I reckon this should happen, and then therefore you use the term common sense to placate a lack of proper scrutiny of what's been said here. And again, I do not blame anybody for engaging in this manner, right? But the problem is that nobody on the right of this discussion actually genuinely cares about the sanctity of women's prisons, because if they did, they would be where I am at this one, where I want to abolish prisons, right? I'm to the left of most of these people in my desire to see the prison system abolished, for example. But it's interesting how they have only started really caring about the issue of regards to poor treatment of prisoners when trans women can be used as a scapegoat to be able to attack, right? They didn't care when it was prison guards raping inmates. They didn't care about it when it was inter-rape between men and men's prisons, for example. They didn't care about any of these things because, as far as they're concerned, prison is a place where people should be punished, and therefore they don't have to care about the ways in which we care for people in the prison system, for example. But now there's a convenient way in which they can weaponize the livelihoods of prisoners to attack a minority that they want to be able to use as a political weapon. And suddenly everyone cares about the human rights of prisoners. Isn't it's preposterous, right? That a trans woman is being put into women's prisons, when again there is a process that gets followed for women, for trans prisoners. It was followed in this instance, and they decided that Isla Bryson should be put in the men's prison because she was a danger to women, and they were correct in that decision. What's the problem? What is the problem?
How many people's decisions had to be made for that to happen? I mean, that's not just like a little bit of paperwork filed incorrectly. That's human beings that have made the decision for a man to go into a female prison. And this is what I'm hoping Labour are doing by trying to do this.
And again, right, she didn't go into the women's prison because she was literally only held in solitary confinement specifically because they were in the middle of making the decision on which prison she should go into, right? And she ended up in a man's prison following the current procedure that we have for delineating who goes where, right? The system works. In fact, Isla Bryson is proof that the system works because it was someone who clearly shouldn't be there, and the decision was made correctly to put her into a men's prison. It wasn't political pressure. It wasn't the GRR going bad. It wasn't any of this stuff. It was just the current procedure that we have at the moment working as it should do. But people don't report on that because that doesn't get you clicks. That doesn't demonise the minority in the way that they want to.
Same with it's not crazy. It's not a crazy opinion to me to think that trans athletes should not be going up against female athletes.
He's literally done it. He's done the fucking meme of thinking that Mac Begg's a trans woman when he's a trans man. And this is what happens when people are lied to by the media and we don't properly scrutinise the stories that they're telling here, right? Like, again, it's just he's a victim of essentially a gigantic years-long propaganda campaign by our captured media to not properly represent or to report on these stories factually and fairly, because our press is institutionally transphobic, possibly for ideological reasons in the case of people like Sonia Soda and Janice Raymond, all of those people, right, for example, but also just in general because they know it makes clicks. They know that it generates talk. They know it's useful for generating revenue, right? Talk TV get hundreds of thousands of views on their shit, their stuff shitting on trans people, because it's easy bait. It's easy, but you don't have to properly think about this stuff to have an opinion on it, right? And so people will have a strong opinion on it, and they'll get sucked into the culture war, and they'll continue consuming the content and make huge amounts of money for the people at Talk TV by, through AdSense revenue or whatever it may be. It's such an easy topic to generate revenue for, so they'll continue to do it. And they don't have to tell the truth, because the only people who are actually going to call them out on the lies that they tell are a tiny minority of people that they've already demonized to the point at which no one takes them seriously anymore. So there's no reason for them not to do it.
Wrestling and swimming and completely destroying them. You can be left-wing and not want males in female prisons. You can be left-wing and not want trans athletes completely destroying female athletes.
Like, okay, what prison should I go to if I go to prison, right? What prison should these tits be in? I hate to be uncouth about it and be gauche, but, like, what prison do I look like I should go in? It's not a difficult decision to make.
This shouldn't be a controversial, wacky opinion. But the reason that I think this is a good move from Labour is because whether you like it or not, a lot of people in this country, a lot of floating voters, a lot of Brexit voters, Red Wall voters, if you like, are concerned about this stuff. They're concerned about the woke stuff, the gender politics, and I know I'm not stupid. You know, I've been doing videos about this for a long time. I know that this is fueled by the right-wing media. I know that all this stuff is just, majority of it is blown way out of proportion just to distract us from what's really...
Yet you won't critically analyse it, right? You admit that the right-wing media blow this out of proportion, yet you take all of their claims at face value. You're smarter than this.
Going on. The things that I care about, government corruption, homelessness, poverty, you know, this stuff is a distraction away from that. I get that. But whether you like it or not, people are concerned about this stuff. And there's no smoke without fire. There is...
See, again, with just the nonsense truisms and not properly understand. Come on, you're smarter than this. I've talked with you. I've watched your content. I know that you're smarter than this. Why are you debasing your content by just going, well, it's common sense, no smoke without fire? A bunch of truisms without properly scrutinising the positions that you're taking here. Because I will tell you, cause the thing is, the transphobes have exactly the same way of being able to intuit their position on this one, right? Because they don't care. They don't really care about the utility of what's going on here, because I am a utilitarian. I take utilitarian position on this, and I know I'm not coy about stating I do. But the actual secret to all of this stuff is that they don't care about the impact on women's sports. They don't care about the impact on female prisoners, right? They have a metaphysical, right, belief in the purity of womanhood. And they think that trans people, by creating some kind of difference in our Abrahamic religiously Abrahamic, understanding of gender relationships, they see that as a way of breaking that down, and they are reactionary to that position, for example, right? Which is why we never have discussions about the current policy that we have around transgender prisoners, because they do not care about whether, you know, Graham Linehan was on his show laughing at the idea of a trans woman being raped 2,000 times, for example, in a men's prison, because that's what can and will and does happen when you put trans women in men's prisons, right? They get raped on a lot, for example. But they don't care about any of that. What they actually care about is the fact that the prison has the word woman on the outside. They don't, because conservatives do not care about utility at all. It's the main difference between the left and the right, really, on these kind of issues. Because they feel that it's wrong that a man or a male should be in a women's prison, because it's bad on its face of it, because they feel like it's untrue. For example, they feel like a taboo is being broken that shouldn't be broken, for example. They do the same thing with drugs policy, where they don't care about whether people use fewer drugs. They don't care about whether things are made safer by legalizing drugs. They do not want the government to seem to be permissive of drug users who they view as inherently morally inferior and or wrong. And it's the same with trans people, right? It doesn't matter whether or not trans women perform the same as cis women in sports do. It doesn't matter whether or not a trans woman in a woman's prison is no threat to the people involved there, whether they've had GRS or not, for example, based upon the review that's been made by the board that oversees this stuff. They don't care about any of that, because it's fundamentally feelings over facts. It's fundamentally, right, I can sense that this means the government is permissive of the idea that trans women can exist, that trans women are women, for example. And that's their fundamental piece of disagreement here. It's not about women's sports being dominated by trans women, because they aren't. It's not about trans women in women's spaces being a threat to women, because they're not. All of the studies that will show you about countries that have proper self-ID, more than we have here, for example, shows you that doesn't lead to any increase in cisgender women being attacked by trans women. Doesn't lead to any of that, or cis men pretending to be trans women. None of these things increase based upon the evidence that we have, because they don't care about evidence. They don't care about utility. They don't care about what's happening. All they care about is that their metaphysical concept of womanhood is being attacked by someone who disagrees. And that's the only thing they really care about. And everything else is just subterfuge, right? It's just subterfuge to try and fake some other reason as to why that we should treat trans women poorly in society. That's it, right?
Fucking neoliberalism.
And I've said this before. They don't care about whether or not women are attacked in prison, because they know that they're not. They care about the fact that the prison has women on the words on the front of the prison. That's literally all they care about. How many trans people compete in sport at a high enough level for it to matter? It's just icky for them. Well, literally, I mean, like, we have entire states in America passing huge bills saying we need to exclude all trans girls from competing in collegiate sport. And in the entire state, can you guess how many collegiate trans women who engage in sport are? One. There's one trans woman in the entire state, and they're passing whole bills specifically for one. It's insane shit. It's crazy, insane shit. There's no utility to any of this. It's just people getting mad because their feelings are hurt. That's all it is. And the worst part about all of this is that the bathroom bills that they want to be able to do, for example, the kind of things they actually want to impose upon people, they don't make sense for exactly the reason why Mac Beggs doesn't make sense. Because, A, people will mistake trans men for trans women because they don't bother scrutinising the issues. And second of all, if you want to force, what the review that Kemi Badenoch wants to be able to put through with the help of the EHRC, for example, that Labour have given a green light to, if you want to force trans men into women's spaces, cis men can pretend to be trans men. The same predatory cis men who theoretically could exploit by pretending to be a trans woman by dressing like one, for example, or by pretending to be one through some kind of gender presentation, for going through all the rigmarole of self-IDing someone as a trans woman to theoretically gain access to women's spaces. They can now don't need to do any of that. They can just pretend to be a trans man and say, sorry, no, I've got a beard. I've got a beard and I'm covered in facial hair, for example. I've got covered in body hair, for example, and I'm balding or whatever it might be. Sorry about that, but I'm a trans man on testosterone. This is what I look like. The law forces me to be here. It doesn't stop the theoretical, quote-unquote, fears that they have of people abusing the system, because it's easier to abuse in the second chance. Again, because they don't care about people abusing the system. They just hate trans women and want to exclude them because it makes their feelings hurt on a metaphysical level. That's it. That's the only reason why they care about this stuff. And literally, and also the athlete bans also attack cisgender intersex women as well. And ironically, as Bilderberg points out in chat, the only way that you can get round the issue of cis men pretending to be trans men is by inspecting people's genitals. And of all of the people to have made this point about why this change in the legislation by the HRC is so apocalyptically stupid, was the notorious JOB. It was literally James O'Brien, who's not been great on trans issues before. He made this point, just like, who's going to check? Right? Who's going to check? Who's going to check who's cisgender and who's transgender? Who's going to check? Right? Literally, the only way you can police this kind of thing is through genital inspections. And I'm sure we don't want that to happen, unless, of course, you live in Arkansas, where they've just passed a bill meaning that teachers can inspect the genitals of children to ensure that they're competing in the right sports races at college. It's absolutely ridiculous. And there's no utility to any of this, as I've said 1,000 times, because they do not care. They just want to exclude trans women. Either A, because their feelings are over what they perceive womanhood to be, and they think that womanhood as a concept is being sullied, or B, they just hate trans people, and they want to see us suffer. Right? That's what Kemi Badenoch is. I fundamentally believe that Kemi Badenoch isn't doing this because of what a lot of people have been saying, that they want red meat, dead cats to be able to distract from the economics positions, for example. I'm sure there are plenty of people like Lee Anderson in the Conservative Party who don't really care about trans issues, for example, but they know that it's a wedge issue to attack, to be able to bring people over on a culture war rather than fighting on the economic front, for example. There are probably plenty of people in the Conservative Party who do believe that. But fundamentally, I do not believe that's Kemi Badenoch's goal. I think she has a genuine visceral disgust towards trans people, and she's weaponizing it against us through the legal levers that she has at her disposal. I think she's disgusting, quite frankly. Anyway, let's continue.
Like the stuff I just mentioned, weird stuff going on that people are concerned about. The trans athletes, the males going into women's prison, and even stuff that it is mainly going on in America, but gender politics being shoved down our kids' throats. I just want kids to be kids. I don't want any politics shoved.
Right, okay, so if we don't teach kids about the existence of trans people or the existence of gay people, for example, right? When I meet a child, what are you going to tell them? Right? What are you going to tell a child when they meet me? If they've never been explained what a transgender person is, right? Or they meet, there's another kid in the class with gay parents. You're not teaching them that gay people exist. What are you going to tell them? What are you going to tell them? I'm part of society. Gay people are part of society. The science tells you that trans kids have their internal sense of gender solidified by the age of 3 or 4, right? You're not going to stop these kids from being trans by taking away the books. You're not going to stop them interacting with trans and gay people by taking away the educational materials around this stuff. Again, this is just born out of hurty feelings and not actually properly scrutinizing the utility of the position here. And I'm so disappointed in this video from this guy because, again, I appreciate his takes on a lot of things, but he's just fundamentally not properly scrutinizing any of the things that he's saying here, and he's just speaking from a place of emotion. Really, this is feels over reals we're getting. As long as I'm swept under the carpet, they won't care. Well, true, yeah. Let kids be kids. One side of this debate is pushing genital inspections and forcing people to pee in bushes, but the left should let kids be kids. Well, do you think that he's thought that far ahead? Of course he hasn't. That's why he's made the video talking about common sense.
Down their throats at a young age. Just let them be kids. Let them enjoy the best part of their life right now. I know mainly this.
And I also don't get how teaching them about the existence of people like the gay and trans people is necessarily not letting kids be kids. Is it not letting kids be kids because we teach them that that Santa Claus isn't real, or that the Second World War happened? Is it sullying their childhood to teach them about the crimes of Nazi Germany, for example, which I learned early in secondary school? I knew what the Holocaust was when I was fucking 12. Right? Did that ruin my childhood? And of course it didn't. In the same way that teaching incredibly basic stuff about the existence of trans people, that's not actually that's not interrupting their childhood.
Stuff is going on in Canada and the US, but they say that the UK is generally 5 years behind America, and people are concerned about this stuff. And I find sometimes the problem with Labour and the left in general is when these things come up, they just tend to plug their ears, go, no, there's no problem. They've done the same for the last 20 years over immigration, and people got wound up about it. They said, no, there's no problem, and they just plug their ears. So they need to come out and address this stuff, because they need those votes. And you see the polls. I've seen so many polls and so many floating voters interviewed when they're asked if they're...
See, the issue with, this is very, very tangentially related to what you just said there. The issue with immigration was actually because of Labour's adherence to neoliberal economics, right? The fact that Tony Blair never properly reversed Thatcher's union legislation led to continual drops in wages, like we were talking about from the Resolution Foundation study, for example. And the thing is, the Blair administration oversaw a period in which wages weren't keeping up with productivity at the same time that they were increasing immigration. So people fundamentally misattributed a fall in wages to an increase in immigration, where there wasn't a link. The link was because of lack of union density. It was because of lack of union bargaining power. Basically the total cucking of our economy to the super rich and the mega corporations at the behest of the working class in this country. Because the press are in the pockets of these big businesses who are the beneficiary of neoliberal economic policy, they were able to easily shift the depressed wages problem onto the immigration, which again doesn't actually affect wages in totality in the way that people think that they do, because people who immigrate are also consumers. The economy grows. There's more. The pot genuinely does grow for everybody in the way that it doesn't with trickle-down economics. But that's a story for another time.
Likely to vote Labour. And time again, they're worried about woke politics. They're worried about gender politics and stuff like this.
And the thing is, this is fundamentally untrue. Where was it? There was a pollster that was talking about this on Twitter. I think I retweeted it ages ago. I'm not going to be able to find it now, which is a shame, because it was a really interesting piece where it showed that concerns about gender politics or trans issues literally nowhere on people's concerns on policy, right? When polled about this stuff, nobody says that this is going to influence who they vote for in an election, apart from a tiny minority of obsessives on the Bird app, right? Where you get this warped perception about what is or is not important to people. Similar to the discussions around the attack ads, ironically, earlier on, right? But when you actually look at the polling, no one cares. People want to see their bills come down. And Labour continually allowing the Conservatives to lead the narrative on this one is only going to make that, it's only for their own detriment by getting them caught into a battlefield that they know that they're going to lose on. And a bunch of incredibly obsessed media pundits like Nick Ferrari or Sonia Soda or Hadley Freeman or Janice Raymond or Alison Pearson or Alex Massey or the random fuckers from The Spectator who have a random bee in their bonnet over trans people. People on the ground who making decisions about who they're going to vote for. They are not looking at trans shit at all, and the polling will show this. But both the Labour Party and this guy are pulling these random fictional swing voters who won't vote Labour Party because of some stuff about trans people. They're pulling these people out of thin air. Or they will see one interview with one person in a vox pop who says, oh, Keir Starmer doesn't know what a woman is. And then they'll use that as the entire of their ability to be able to try and invent some fictional reality in which people are changing their vote to the Conservatives specifically over Labour being pro-trans, when actually all of the wide-scale polling on this issue shows that the complete opposite is true, right? Less than 2%, I think it was, from a poll ages ago cared about trans issues, and even now, people still don't care.
Like I keep saying, I can't refer this point enough. I know it's overblown, the majority of it is overblown crap trap from the right-wing media, but we can't just ignore, we can't make the mistakes of feeding the right-wing media like we had with Jeremy Corbyn when he refused to sing the national anthem, or, you know, just to be stupid mistakes that voters...
So what you're saying is...
neoliberalism.
What you're saying is
any
fucking
issue is a
neoliberalism.
cudgel to be wielded. D.
True. That worked out really. I love that emote. That alert does wonders all the time. Fucking because of fucking neoliberalism. True, Zio, 100%. But what he's essentially saying here is because the right wing press have this specific bugbear over trans people, where they write articles and they manufacture narratives specifically because they want to hurt us. And you're saying, well, the media are saying this kind of stuff, so I guess Labour have to give in and hurt the trans people for the sake of of a handful of votes in the red wall, or whatever it might be. And I'm sorry, does my community mean that little to you? That we are red meat to be thrown away in the sake of a tiny electoral gain? And that's incredibly depressing, because that's literally what you're saying here.
Stay with voters, and Keir Starmer done this when he didn't want to define what a woman is. I mean, this stuff is ridiculous to me. It's so ridiculous to me. But this just feeds into the right-wing media, and so many people, that sticks with them. They won't vote for Labour. They won't vote for Keir Starmer because he couldn't define what a woman.
And things. The problem is any amount of giving way on this issue, which Keir Starmer has done, about the EHRC ruling, about, you know, trying to say that he's not going to impact women's spaces like West Streeting has done. Any amount of ground that they give, it's never enough until he becomes as performatively cruel to trans people as they are. There's no point. He's not going to win any voters, because for the rabid right-wing media in this country and the goons of the commentariat, any amount of position that he takes that isn't just completely marginalised trans people in totality is never going to be good enough for them. So why play the game? Why bother? Right? And I think, quite frankly, Keir Starmer did the right thing for once in this LBC interview, where he said, look, right, you asked me about this. People on the doorstep are not asking about this. They're asking about the NHS. They're asking about crime. They're asking about the cost of living. And the person who called into LBC a few days ago, speaking to Nick Rafari, said, this is nonsense, right? This is complete nonsense, and it's just a complete distraction. And that's what Keir Starmer should be saying, right? Over and over again, saying, like, why are you asking these ridiculous questions? And he gave an okay answer on LBC, where he said, like, 99% of people, it's purely biological, but there is a small minority that we shouldn't throw under the bus, which he then proceeded to throw under the bus. But I digress, for example. Because then there is no point in playing the game, because it will never be enough until trans people become second-class citizens, which apparently he thinks is okay for me to become a second-class citizen, for the small desires of Labour to want to win some swing votes in some constituencies. That's how little my future human rights matter. Apparently, it is all acceptable losses in the theatre of electoral politics.
Woman is. This stuff, we know it from the past with Ed Miliband and his bacon sandwich, and, you know, go back as much as you want. It's the most ridiculous things that put people off voting Labour, and the right-wing media feed them. And like I say, I really don't think it's a controversial position to just be in favour of common sense when it comes to trans rights. And
again, you say this without having to justify any of these positions with any utility. You've just gone, I reckon that trans people should be excluded. I reckon I know what's going on here. And you've not even properly scrutinised any of the positions that you've taken, or any of the stories that you're quoting as the reasons for you taking these positions. Come on.
You know what, the most ridiculous thing about this is, I don't know whether you guys share the same opinion, but I kind of feel that
Am I adding fuel to the proverbial fire by talking about the trans issues? People in my chat will have watched my channel for ages. I do not talk about trans stuff on this channel at all, right? I made a video about Anna Kasparian, made a video about Graham Linehan. That's it. I really do avoid this stuff because I hate talking about it. I really do hate talking about it. And I would much rather be talking about macroeconomic policy, which is why I spend the vast majority of my time on this channel talking about. But this is a guy who I still like. He's a friend. We talk in DMs. I've been on his channel. We are good friends, right? In the world of YouTube content creators, for example. And these things, when people he is well-meaning, right? He is well-meaning in this discussion here, and I don't doubt that for a second, for example. But he is blowing things out of proportion, which he agrees with me on the media ecosystem, also blowing this out of proportion. But he is just essentially re-regurgitating these same right-wing narratives, which are basically lies, without properly scrutinizing them at all. And he's not thought through his positions in a way that he would do if it was any other issue whatsoever, right? If it was issues about Brexit, for example, he would have thought through this with proper scrutiny on all of the facts, for example. But he's not done it here. And that's why I'm making this video.
10, 20 years ago, I think we were at a more accepting place. It felt like the majority of people had the same opinion on trans people. We were all for trans rights. Back in the day, you had storylines on Coronation Street. Paul O'Grady recently passed away. He was on Saturday Night TV as Lily Savage. I felt that the majority of people were on board. You know, we take you as your character. It doesn't matter what you wear, what you want to present yourself like. If you want to dye your hair this colour or have this hair, it doesn't matter. We judge you on your character and we're accepting. It kind of felt we were a much more accepting society 10, 20 years ago. But in the last sort of 5, 10 years, we've had this strange thing. I don't know whether it's the rise of social media or TikTok or whatever to blame is, but what tends to happen a lot in politics is we're at the centre, and now we've gone to the two extremes, and it seems like we've got over the top trans activism. Like I say, people wanting gender politics shoved down our kids' throats. The people
again, we just want people to be educated about people who exist in society, right? The fact that you're even referring to this as shoving it down people's throats, it's ridiculous. That's ridiculous framing of this issue. Without, again, you've not even properly justified this. You just put some pictures of some books up on the screen and not properly gone into this, right? Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there is a wider point that you're making here that I've not seen, for example. And again, if you want to come on stream and chat about this, Van Man, 100% happy to do so. We're good friends, like we're mates. Happy to have this discussion. I know you'd be reasonable if we did discuss this, for example. But you've not made any justification for any of these points. It's completely unjustified. You've just taken it as read through what I can only assume as moral intuition rather than any kind of proper understanding of the issues, for example. Mastodon smashing? I mean, depends which Mastodon album, right? If it's Crack the Sky, I'm super in, but, you know, I thought The Hunter was pish. Early Mastodon better than later Mastodon.
that want trans athletes and want males going into women's prisons.
And the thing is that he says, right, 10 years ago, for example, he was saying we were much more accepting than we are now. And he's saying, but now we have trans activists wanting men in women's sports, they're wanting men in women's prisons. Trans women have been competing in women's sports for 20 years, right? We've been accessing women, been sent to women's prisons ever since the Equality Act. These things have been happening. We've been using women's spaces. These things were never, ever a problem until, you know, the right-wing media hacks who have this specific bugbear decided to use this position either because they wanted to be able to attack trans people because they're cruel individuals in general, which I think is the case with Sonia Soda and people like that, for example, or because they want to fuel a culture war because it generates clicks. That's it. These things have been it's not ludicrous trans activism that's caused this. These are things that have been happening for decades. But people haven't been paying attention because it's not been fought upon in the specific way that it has been right now because of the specific pet issues of a handful of media hacks with no real issues, no real problems, for example, right? This would never have been an issue without them. And in fact, it's incredible that I have to say this, and it hurts me, but it's true. The discourse has basically been shifted by J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling has a massive platform, and her deliberately, you know, being aggressively transphobic, wanting to take away our healthcare, our rights, all of those kind of things, for example. The things that he is decrying here as being non-common sense that have been part of law for 13 years since the Equality Act. That's what J.K. Rowling wants to take away, and he believes that it's quote-unquote common sense to do so, when it's been part of the Equality Act for 13 years, and it's only become a problem in the last 3, and he's correctly identified that it's become a problem recently without properly scrutinising the law and the way the law works, that this has always been the case ever since the Equality Act was passed. But again, the press the right wing rely on people not being educated about these issues to be able to push its continual lies, like it has done about this issue for the entirety of the time when this has been a hot button topic for the last 3 years or so.
Of these is not what the general trans population want, but the extreme has come out, which has pushed people to the other extreme, where you just get blatant transphobia online. I don't have a problem with people pointing out the common sense things that I've just mentioned, but then that just goes from that into more and more extreme.
A billionaire has changed this discourse. J.K. Rowling was claiming herself that she brought down Nicola Sturgeon. There were articles in the Telegraph saying that Humza Yousaf being in support of the gender reform bill means that he would get taken down by J.K. Rowling. This billionaires should not fucking exist. They should not have as much cultural power as they do to be able to entirely control the discourse like people like Elon Musk and Rowling are able to do with their huge amounts of influence. It's so dangerous for democracy for these people to have so much power, where they can personally claim that they can have specific veto power over a democratically elected first minister through the force of their own reach that they have as an incredibly wealthy individual.
Like I say, maybe it's social media. The more and more they're absorbing, they're just going to the more extreme of transphobia, where they're just making videos taking the piss out of a guy in a dress, which is just dreadful. I think we've gone backwards. I genuinely think on trans rights we've gone backwards, and it's terrible to say. We need to get back to a more common sense way of thinking, and I hope this is what we're going for and what Labour are trying to do. I don't know, guys. What's your fault? Is what I'm saying controversial?
And things, it's not common sense, because they will literally be putting fully transitioned trans men into women's prisons. Fully transitioned trans men have had phalloplasty. They've got fucking dicks, right? And functional ones at that, right? Far more functional than mine is after however many years of HRT. I'll tell you that for starters. TMI maybe, but it serves my point well, right? People who've had phalloplasty have genuine functioning penises that they can commit rapes with in women's prisons. And the proposed changes to the definition of sex under the Equality Act, for example, that the EHRC and Kemi Badenoch are pushing for, would force these people into women's prisons, into women's spaces. And other women's spaces where there are not genital inspections like there are in prisons, for example, cis men can pretend to be trans men to be able to get access to them, right? It's not common sense, it's stupid. The real common sense is, right, the thing that would upset the fewest people in the actual real situations outside of hypotheticals, where I, obviously looking as I do, would use a woman's changing room, would use a woman's toilet. I don't know why people would think I shouldn't, because I would, not only do people just assume I'm a woman when they meet me in the street, for example, people automatically and instinctively use she, her pronouns at every single time. I've not been misgendered in years on the street, for example, or in common parlance. But if I was forced into a men's room, I would get raped, right? It's as simple as that. This is the common sense position based upon utility, right? But the proper utilitarian analysation of what's going on, rather than just saying, well, I reckon that it's silly that trans women go in women's prisons because, I don't know, that's how I feel, rather than, because it's just, again, unfortunately, facts do not care about your feelings.
It doesn't feel controversial in any way. Like I say, I want more than anything for an overall accepting society, and I think the majority of people in this country do. Apologies if I offended people, but I can't say what I'm saying is. And
again, I'm not offended. You're just wrong. Like, you just haven't thought through your position.
Offensive, and I hate myself for saying this because it's like the racist that says, oh yeah, but I've got a black friend, I can't be racist. But I've got friends that are trans. A very good friend of mine and my wife who works at a hospital with her is trans. And
have me on street.
The stupid thing is we don't even talk about trans because we don't see each other as identities. We talk to each other as a human being. Anyway, I'm babbling now. What's your thoughts, guys? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comments down below. Till next time. Take care.
Well, you got a whole ass response video, so you know, if you want to come on and talk about it, you're welcome to come on and talk about it. But I felt like I did a reasonable debunking in that response video, so might just need to involve a few comments or a few Twitter DMs. But you can't act all progressive and self-righteous while referring to trans women in men's prisons as men. I mean, there are theoretically, you know, someone who's going to get banged up and go into prison, for example, may think that they would want to have a better time in a women's prison and therefore would fake being a trans woman, right? Obviously, you can't tell who's who in these situations, who's genuine and who's not. But that's why the system exists. That's not why the system exists in the way that it does at the moment, like in the case of Isla Bryson. The reason why Isla Bryson was put into a men's prison is because she was a danger to women. As simple as that. It's as simple as that. And that should be the utilitarian position on this stuff, where we follow the current process based upon the perceived danger to somebody, right? Isla Bryson was a sex criminal, right? She shouldn't be in a women's prison, for example. But should a trans woman who commits fraud or theft, for example, who goes to prison, right? They're not a violent criminal. They've not shown any propensity to engage in any kind of sex crime. Why should they be put into a men's prison? They're clearly not any kind of threat, especially if they're way down the cycle of HRT like yours truly is, to the point at which even if I wanted to engage in sexual assault, would it be fucking possible? Do you know what HRT does to penises, right? I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail, but it makes things like that difficult. Is their channel big? 10k subs, so about 5 times the size of mine. 4 times maybe now, because I've had increase in subs since the appearance on the Sunday roast. I reckon, like with most broadly progressive people, if you just sat down and explained the facts, they'd just go, oh yeah, that makes sense. And I think that'll probably be what the response to this video will be. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. Thanks for pointing that out. That makes more sense to me now, for example. Maybe we'll have differences of opinion on this. Maybe he will just come and say, well, actually, no, I do not believe real women know justice. I don't believe trans women are women. I believe that trans women are males who present as women, for example. And even if you believe that, the utilitarian position is still to put them in women's prisons. It's still to put them in, give them access to women's spaces, right? It's still the utilitarian position, actually, to put them in women's sports because their testosterone levels are low enough, so much so they don't have a competitive advantage, and has been shown through scientific testing. Even if you don't believe that trans women are real women, for example, the utilitarian position is still to keep the current provisions as they are at the moment. So yeah, that's the video response. If you want to come on stream, I'm always here. If you want to chat in DMs, you want to jump in the comments and respond, that's fine. But I think that this is a case of ignorance rather than malice, clearly. But it's disappointing that you've not thought through your positions more thoroughly or properly scrutinized your sources more thoroughly here. But anyway, as always, like, comment, subscribe, hit bell, money, give me now more money, future YouTube viewers. Cheers.